Hello the internet! Today is day 9 of putting together a DIY 3D printed analog synthesizer that I plan on donating to the Synth Library of Portland as soon as it's done. I'm going to be releasing a new video each day in which I add a new module to the rack until the whole project is finally done, and then we're going to give it away. So go ahead and sub if you want to see what I build tomorrow. So what I'm going to be adding to the rack today is this little steady workhorse, the double VCA from Music from Outer Space. This comes as a DIY kit, which I've assembled several of because I really like them, so I have a bunch of them. It's not that there's anything insanely special about the way it functions, it's just very affordable. It does exactly what it's supposed to do, and it just works great, and you usually kind of forget that it's there, which is generally what I would want out of a VCA. So what is a VCA? Well, you pretty much need a VCA in any synthesizer in order to make like recognizable notes. I'll explain what I mean. We're going to put a signal in and get a signal out that's being shaped in a way that makes it musical and not just raw output from an oscillator. So this right here is plugged into my mixer, which you'll hear in your speakers. I'll plug that into the output of the VCA. Nothing's plugged into the input, so we're not going to hear anything just yet. Next up, I'm going to take this cable, which is coming out of one of my filters. So I have a synth voice going in there, there's oscillators making noise into the filter, and this comes out of the filter. We're going to put that in the input, and we still don't hear anything yet because this VCA is what we'd call closed. It's like cut off to where it's not letting any sound through, but I can manually open it using this knob, and we just have constant noise coming out. That's not very musical. So we're going to take a control voltage that's going to automatically open and close the VCA to turn it into something a little bit more like a music note. So this cable right here is plugged into the output of an envelope generator. Every time I press a key on this keyboard, that envelope generator is going to be triggered, and it supplies a voltage that rises and falls to turn this into more of an actual music note rather than just noise. So I'm plugging that into the control voltage input, and now every time I press a key, we're getting actual notes out of it and not just... And we can adjust the envelope generator to shape those notes, etc. So that there is one of the most basic and essential usages of a VCA, but there's still a little bit more this thing can do. You might be noticing that there's an additional plug point there which we're not using. I'll show you what it does. So this cable is plugged into an LFO, or a low frequency oscillator. Basically it's just a wave that's constantly wiggling up and down. Right now I have it on a sine wave, and I'll plug that into this extra patch point here. So now that sine wave is opening and closing the VCA, producing a sort of tremolo effect. But we don't want to hear that all the time. That's where this bias knob comes in. I just ease off until I can't hear it anymore, because when that waveform goes positive, it pushes the bias up a little too high. So and now we only hear that tremolo when we're actually plucking a note. But if we feel like that tremolo is too deep and too intense, we can take this knob, and this will attenuate what's coming into that second control voltage input, so it's not as drastic anymore. But then of course the bias needs to come up a little. It doesn't need to be down as low because the thing that's interfering with it is at a lower amplitude. But we still get that wiggle. It's just attenuated through this knob. But there's still more that we can do. In fact, we can take that same tremolo effect, and using the other side, the second VCA that's built in here, we can make it a little bit more natural. And I'm going to show you how we can do that by attenuating not just audio, but we can actually take control voltage signals and use this VCA to process them as well. So I'm going to take this patch cable and take this other channel that we've got here, take its output, and plug it into this second control voltage input on the right channel. And I'm gonna dime this all the way out so that it's able to let as much of this blue cable through as possible. So next I want to take my tremolo signal, that little LFO from before. I'm going to take that and plug it into the input of the second VCA. Now I've configured my little MIDI controller here so that the modulation wheel is connected to this wire. When I roll the modulation wheel down, this wire is basically at 0, and when I roll this modulation wheel all the way up, it goes to its maximum voltage, which for this rig is like 7.5 volts or something. So now we're going to use this side to process control voltage. So there's a control voltage that's going in and being attenuated up and down, and it'll use this signal to decide when to let it through and when to clamp it down. So when we're doing things that way, what I'm going to do is turn this channel from exponential into linear mode, and unfortunately I've actually got these labels backwards here, is what it is. Anyway, so we've got it set to linear mode, and I'm going to take the bias and roll it all the way up. That is like a quirk of this circuit, that when you're processing control voltages and you've got it in linear mode, you kind of want to just crank that bias. So now when I play, we've got no tremolo until we take that modulation wheel and roll it up. And now the tremolo signal gets through. And we could, instead of using something like the modulation wheel, we could put that on an envelope, so that over time, as you hold the note, the trem comes in harder and then it goes away. So those are all kinds of things that you can do with 2 channels of a VCA. So now that we've essentially got like that LFO that we can automatically crank up and down attached to this blue wire here, we don't necessarily have to use it for tremolo plugged into here. We could pull this out. So now by unplugging the output of this side from the control voltage on this side, they're now operating independently. This side is doing its own thing, shaping the note. And then on this side, we've got that LFO, that wiggly signal that we can attenuate or let through and send down this cable to wherever we want. It doesn't have to be a tremolo effect on the other side. So I'll pull this out and I'll plug it into the filter. So now when I'm playing, back down the bias a little. There we go. So now I can use my modulation wheel to let the LFO through to affect the filter. So because this is a 2-in-1 module, we've got these 2 halves of the VCA acting totally independently of each other and doing totally opposite things. On the one side, we have the sound source going in and then coming back out, and that sound source is getting louder and quieter based on this envelope generator. Then on the other side, we have an LFO going in, and then we have the attenuated version of that LFO coming back out, and whether or not that LFO is just dead flat or if it's coming through 100% is based on this wire that's connected to our modulation wheel. So because the amount of tremolo is coming through a MIDI controlled source, in this case the little modulation wheel on my MIDI controller, instead of tying that to the modulation wheel, you could have it automatically be sequenced or something by like an MPC or whatever. So you could just have it automatically configured so that certain passages will have tremolo or whatever type of modulation you want coming in and out in a way that you've like orchestrated ahead of time, which is very handy. I know a VCA isn't the most attention grabbing module in the world, so I've tried to keep this short and sweet, but every synthesizer needs one, so I'm going to be including this handy dandy dual VCA module into the donation synth, and that donation synth should have everything necessary to make a stereo patch, so if you need 2 synth voices, you can get them out of this one module. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. Feel free to subscribe. My name is Wesley, and we're getting close to the end of this project, so I'm looking forward to getting this thing out the door soon. Have a good one. Bye.